Would you let thousands of ducks loose on your farm? No fences, no control, just birds, rice, and chaos? That's exactly what happened in southern China, where farmers released a swarm of ducks into active rice paddies on purpose. It was bizarre. People stopped to film it. Online, the footage sparked everything from curiosity to confusion. But this wasn't a prank, neither was it a stunt. It was farming. As the months went by, the ducks didn't ruin the crops, they actually saved them. They went around eating pests, fertilizing soil, and even helping in some ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And in the span of a single season, what started as a strange experiment turned into something no one expected. Now, 1 year later, the results draw global attention. Scientists are intrigued, and a centuries-old technique may be leading the next wave of climate-smart farming. But it also raises bigger questions about the future of agriculture. Now, to outsiders, this event probably looked like a bizarre experiment, and I wouldn't blame them. A rice field turned into a playground for birds doesn't quite seem like the kind of thing a serious farmer would try. But then again, this wasn't just a random gamble. It was, in fact, a carefully planned agricultural system, one rooted in ancient tradition and backed by modern science. Let me elaborate. It's known as rice duck farming and has been practiced across China for over 600 years. Ages before chemical fertilizers and pesticides came about, farmers had already discovered that ducks were able to help around the farm. So what did they do? Well, they went around patrolling the paddies, eating insects, fertilizing soil, and even helping to manage weeds. They really worked in harmony with nature. However, over time, the world moved on. The rise of synthetic agriculture in the 20th century shifted traditional methods to the background. Animals got replaced with machines. Sprayers replaced birds. And the ducks, well, they vanished from the fields almost entirely. But in the early 2000s, things changed. Some agricultural scientists in China, Japan, and Southeast Asia went back to nature. They realized that bringing ducks into rice fields wasn't just a thing of the past, it was surprisingly effective. Controlled studies show that fields with ducks needed way less pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers, and they produced nearly the same or even higher rice yields. In other words, ducks made farming more cost-effective while potentially increasing your output. As the years went by, some farmers in Zhejiang, Fujian, and Guangdong brought ducks back into their farming systems. In some areas where this practice was readily adopted, it was done at a much larger scale. Basically, it was a serious attempt to improve their farming industry by making it more resilient, more profitable, and more sustainable. Especially while the industry continues to face issues like climate change, soil degradation, and rising production costs. And as we're about to see, the results went far beyond what anyone expected. So when the ducks got released, many people assumed they'd cause problems. After all, rice plants are delicate as they begin to grow. A few hundred birds trampling through the paddies sounded like a surefire recipe for disaster. But surprisingly, the ducks didn't destroy anything. In fact, they avoided the rice almost entirely. Instead, they went after what the farmers actually wanted gone, which were insects, weeds, and pests. Almost immediately, the ducks began to do what chemicals usually handled. Ducks in the rice duct system eat different kinds of small organisms in rice paddies, including plant hoppers, stem borers, and leaf hoppers. The way they move in water also disturbs the surface, which destroys mosquito larvae, and that reduces how much spraying needs to be done. Thus, by destroying these pests, rice paddies are able to grow with fewer disturbances, and farmers spend far less on pesticides. Then came the weeds. Usually in rice paddies, herbicides are used to stop weeds from growing. In rice duct systems, ducks eat a lot of plants like barnyard grass, duckweed, and red rice. Additionally, when they move in the water, their feet disturb the soil surface, which affects the development of some types of weeds. Now, that churning of the soil also brought another unexpected benefit. As the ducks moved, they improved the oxygen flow in the water, and that was really useful. It reduced how much the soil compacted and encouraged root growth in the rice. Researchers related it to a sort of natural tilling that the ducks engaged in. On top of that, there was fertilizer. Ducks produce rich, nitrogen-heavy droppings as they move. In most conventional rice farms, nitrogen is added through synthetic fertilizer. However, it's usually done excessively, which causes runoff that pollutes rivers and lakes. But in rice duck farms, the duck's waste became a natural source for nutrients. This organic matter enriched the soil, fed the rice plants, and significantly reduced the need for repeated chemical applications. What's even more surprising is that the ducks actually made the rice fields more efficient. Since they provided multiple services all at once, the farmers didn't just cut costs, they saved time, too. And because there were less chemicals, many farms could sell their products as clean and organic, fetching higher prices in local markets. Of course, all this didn't happen by chance. Timing mattered heavily. Ducks were usually introduced about 2 to 3 weeks after the rice was transplanted, once the seedlings were strong enough to withstand some movement. The birds stayed in the fields for several weeks or months, depending on the region and climate. They were carefully managed to prevent overgrazing and sometimes removed during critical flowering stages of the rice. In short, this wasn't the least bit chaotic. It was actually a carefully balanced system. And by letting the ducks do what they do naturally, the farms began to thrive in ways no one had predicted. But this was just the beginning, because after one full season, the numbers started to come in. And they didn't just surprise the farmers, they surprised the scientists too. So what were the results after 1 year? After a full growing season, the results were absolutely brilliant. Across multiple regions in southern China, farmers that adopted the rice duck systems began reporting higher yields from their farms. In some scenarios, the increase was a bit modest, around 7% from some trials in Chinese fields. But in others, depending on soil quality and duck-to-acre ratios, yields rose by as much as 18.1%, as seen in a 2020 peer-reviewed study published in Sustainability, MDPI. And that's not all. Sometimes, farmers barely use chemicals like pesticides and herbicides. This approach changes the way chemical management is handled within the rice duck system. In some pilot areas, they removed them completely. Fertilizer costs dropped as well, since duck droppings were enough to take the role of fertilizer in the soil. However, it wasn't just about what they saved in profit, it was also about what they gained. Ducks that got raised in the paddies grew healthy and plump from their natural diet of insects and aquatic plants. At the end of the season, many farmers sold the ducks for meat, either locally or at premium prices. Some even sold the duck eggs, and that gave them yet another source of income. Now, we absolutely cannot forget about the rice itself. Because these farms used fewer chemicals and leaned on natural systems, their rice could be marketed as duck rice or eco rice. This wasn't just branding, it was backed by practice. As a result, the rice often fetched 10 to 20% more per kilogram than the usual rice varieties. In regions where food safety is a growing concern, consumers were happy that they were paying for food that was more friendly to the environment. Apart from winning economically, the impact on the environment was huge too. Fields that usually needed regular chemical treatments now thrived with little to no runoff. Water quality improved as well. Insects that were beneficial to the environment came back. Farmers also noticed something unexpected. Lower methane emissions were taking place. And these changes didn't go unnoticed. Many people took note, including researchers from Chinese agricultural universities and international experts, who began to examine the results more closely. Afterwards, they found that the rice duck system not only reduced inputs, but it increased resilience as well. Obviously, the farmers benefited from this fact, although a lot of them had been skeptical at first, but after one full cycle, most of them were convinced. As the word spread, more organizations set up training sessions. Small pilot programs became community-wide shifts. In some specific provinces, the local government started something new. They gave out small subsidies and incentives as their way of supporting the transition to rice duck farming. This approach was kind of a way to combine traditional practices with modernization so it'll last longer and be much more efficient. And as the next planting season drew closer and closer, it was pretty obvious that there would be a lot more ducks in the fields. Undoubtedly, the farmers were thrilled with the development of higher yields and lower costs, but something else was happening, something they didn't expect. Now the ducks weren't just improving the rice, they were reviving entire ecosystems. In many rice farming areas, the many years of using chemicals had taken a silent but huge toll on the ecosystems. Insects that were necessary in the environment went missing. Small animals like frogs and birds became scarce. Water in the paddies often turned murky or stagnant. Biological life was draining from the area. So after the ducks got reintroduced, the biodiversity in the rice paddies started improving. The ducks eat up pests, so the plants wouldn't have to rely on pesticides, which were also harmful to the local ecosystem. As time went on, species like dragonflies, frogs, spiders, and small fish started returning to the fields. It's incredible. And they weren't alone. They came with beneficial insects that pollinate crops. Moreover, birds like herons and egrets came back. The paddies themselves got healthier too. Ducks constantly moving through the water helped prevent algae buildup and increased oxygen circulation. The result was cleaner water, which supported not only rice but also local aquatic life. All of this meant that rice duck farming wasn't just sustainable, it was truly regenerative. It restored the age-old balance instead of just minimizing how much damage was done. Additionally, in places where farms had once functioned alone, like isolated factories, the landscape began to act more like a living web again. Everything was connected, and the ducks were the thread pulling it all back together. It's kind of funny. You could say the land came back to life. Indeed, the rice duck revival made headlines in China, but the impact didn't stop at its borders. It went international. So researchers and agricultural planners went to work. When they started analyzing the success of rice duck farming in provinces like Zhejiang and Fujian, the model started gaining traction in other parts of the world as well. And it's not hard to see why. Many of the challenges Chinese farmers faced, such as soil degradation, pesticide resistance, declining yields, and climate stress, are issues that affect people all over the world. Subsequently, in Vietnam and Thailand, governments and NGOs began testing rice duck systems in regions that were prone to flooding. There, the ducks not only helped improve yields, but also gave farmers yet another source of income when the weather got unpredictable. During periods of extreme weather and floods, when rice paddies suffered, farmers could buffer some of their losses by selling ducks for meat and eggs. The waterfowls were truly hard at work. So this trend isn't limited to one country. In fact, one of the clearest examples of long-term rice duck farming success comes from Japan. One of the most compelling modern success stories comes from Furuno's farm in Fukuoka Prefecture, Japan, where the Igamo method has been practiced since the 1980s. Introduced by Takao Furuno, this system carefully integrates hybrid Igamo ducks into rice paddies to naturally control weeds and pests, aerate the water, and fertilize the soil with duck droppings. Furuno discovered that releasing ducklings 7 days after rice transplanting at a density of about 15 to 30 per 0.1 hectares and removing them at around 8 weeks prevented damage to the plants. His farm, now spanning roughly 3 hectares, routinely matches or exceeds the yields of chemical-based rice while eliminating most pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. Beyond rice, Furuno's ducklings are raised for meat and eggs, diversifying his income, and his duck rice brand commands a 20 to 30% premium in Japanese markets. The Igamo model has since spread to over 75,000 farms across Asia, China, Korea, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and beyond, supported by farmers, NGOs, and agricultural agencies seeking sustainable, low-input alternatives. Furuno's example shows that time-tested ecological practices, when refined, can thrive in the modern era and inspire a global shift toward regenerative agriculture. Also, in Bangladesh, rice is a staple crop. However, the floods are pretty frequent, so the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, supported pilot projects that helped train smallholder farmers to bring ducks into their fields. The early results were very similar to China's. The ducks reduced input costs, made the soil much healthier, and brought higher resilience to pests. And we simply can't forget sub-Saharan Africa. Impressively, countries like Madagascar and Nigeria have seen interest in the model. Rice paddies in lowland areas are being adapted to support small flocks of ducks, and the local species are being trialed to see if they're compatible. Without a doubt, rice duck farming isn't just for developing regions. In Japan, a technique known as igamo farming, which combines duck rearing with organic rice cultivation, has been refined since the 1980s. Japanese farms that use this method have created a niche popularity among consumers that are eco-conscious, as well as export markets, too. On this note, we can see that at its core, this system adapts surprisingly well. It doesn't need tons of expensive machinery or high-tech tools. Instead, it uses simple biology to manage tough challenges on the farm. As promising as rice duck farming sounds, it comes with quite a number of challenges too. While the system is simple theoretically, making it work practically takes time, knowledge, and lots of planning. First of all, ducks aren't maintenance-free. Maintaining the ducks takes consistent effort. Farmers had to carefully watch the way the ducks moved in the paddies. They also monitored them for signs of illness. Also, they had to remove all the ducks from the paddies before the rice began to flower. If the ducks stayed there for too long, they would definitely damage the plants by trampling or feeding on them, and the farmers didn't want that, so the timing had to be just right. It was quite a task. There's also the issue of predators. In some rural areas, ducks are really threatened by snakes, foxes, hawks, and stray dogs. Farmers have to protect their ducks with fencing, guard animals, or additional labor to reduce the risk of predators catching them. However, such methods don't always work. Smaller farms just don't have the resources needed to protect their ducks at all times. And that's not all. Yet another challenge is the water control factor. The rice duck systems work best in paddies that have stable levels of water, but in regions with irregular rainfall or poor irrigation, maintaining the right conditions for both ducks and rice can be very tricky. Then again, there's the training gap. Not every farmer knows how to properly balance animal and crop management. In many places, especially where rice duck systems are being newly introduced, hands-on training and support systems are extremely essential. Without that guidance, the farmers might either mismanage the system or give up too early. There's also the question of market access. So we already know that duck rice or eco rice can get sold at a premium. However, not all farmers have the ability to reach those buyers. In areas with no strong local food networks or way to label eco-friendly stuff, the added benefits may be harder to monetize. So no, it's not a bed of roses, but for those who can make it work, well, it's a powerful and natural alternative to chemical-heavy industrial agriculture. In a world racing toward automation, high-tech solutions, and chemical fixes, it's almost poetic that one of the most effective agricultural breakthroughs came not from a lab, but from ducks. Rice duck farming does not depend on high-cost machinery or synthetic inputs. It's not a universal fix, but it shows that when farmers cooperate with natural processes, the results can be both productive and sustainable. In the end, China's farmers didn't really remake agriculture, but they remembered it. They didn't just waddle into rice fields, they walked into the future. What are your thoughts on rice duck farming? Leave them in the comments section, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.